Good morning and welcome to the 24th meeting of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. This morning it is our pleasure to welcome the Special Advisor of the Government for the consultations on linguistic duality and our new action plan, Mr. Bernard Laure. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of all committee members. And perhaps before going any further, I would just like to point out that I was struck in your report by the first recommendation that emphasizes the importance of education for minority community development. And that is a priority that is shared by the members because it's a recommendation that we made ourselves. So without any further delay, I would welcome you to begin your opening remarks. You have about 10 minutes, and that will be followed by a round of 7-minute questions, and then we will move on to subsequent rounds of 5-minute questions. So, Mr. Laure, you now have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's with great pleasure that I come before you today. I accepted your invitation to come here today to speak about the work that I did as Special Advisor for the Government on Official Languages, and the work that I carried out started in the month of December. We held several consultations throughout the country. We went to Vancouver, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Moncton, and we also went to Halifax. And at the same time, in parallel, there were online consultations. I also met with groups on an individual basis and individuals, for example, commissioners of official languages from Ontario and New Brunswick, for example. These were very good, productive, constructive sessions, and the people who participated were pleased to be there, and they had many good ideas, and it was clear that a lot of good work had already been done. So my mandate wasn't to start over again, it was to build on the work that had already been done. And during this work, I also read the work that you yourself had done. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having sent me a copy of the report that your committee prepared here. I would also like to thank you for all the talks we had on this topic, because that really helped me stay abreast of all the work that had already been accomplished. It is clear that throughout Canada, many people are interested in the official languages issue. Many people want to participate in this debate, and people are confident, they're determined to move ahead on this.
Travel coast to coast and to meet Canadians who care deeply about their country and care deeply about official languages. And I met people that wanted to continue to work to advance both official languages from coast to coast. So, Mr. Chair, since I'm here this morning at your invitation, I'm here really to help you in your work. I'll be happy to answer the questions, and I decided to keep my remarks very brief this morning.
Mr. Laure, you've been given us one of the most briefest presentations amongst all the guests that have come before us. But we'll start our round immediately, and we'll lead off with the official opposition and Mr. Pablo Rodriguez. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Laure, welcome. I'm over here. Do you feel that your mandate was a clear and precise one when you undertook your work? Yes, my mandate was very clear, very specific, and I would even refer to the contract I signed with the department. I have it here before me. And it sets out the mandate that was given to me. If you like, I could, well, just give me the general lines. It's a very short one, so I might as well read it. So it says that I agree to undertake the following work: to preside over consultations with key stakeholders invited by the department to regional events, and then to report on results through Heritage Canada, the status of women in official languages. If necessary, and with the approval of the person, other key stakeholders will be consulted on official languages. The chair will preside over several events in Vancouver, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Toronto, Moncton, Halifax. And the results of these consultations will be tabled in December in the shape of a report that will be submitted to the said departments in Ottawa. And the chair will hold a wrap-up session in Ottawa in January that will provide the general outline of the consultations. That was my mandate. Well, what I was more interested in was the means you were going to use. I understand that you were going to meet and consult and travel and present a report, but were there clear goals that you were supposed to achieve within those communities? Were you asked to focus on certain aspects other than others and address certain topics rather than others? Well, there were several questions that had been recommended to trigger dialogue with people throughout these consultations, and there were also open sessions where individuals who were invited had an opportunity to speak to various topics that they were interested in. So there weren't any limits on those topics. I see. So there were no strict limits on the topics. As you know, the committee did travel and hold rather extensive consultations throughout the country previously. Do you think another series of consultations, the ones you held, were necessary? Because when we listened to the communities, we thought we heard that communities were telling us to stop consulting and to act. Well, I think that the consultations were very constructive and productive. There were many groups and individuals who participated, and they were very pleased to be able to do so. Now, it should be pointed out that Minister Werner made a commitment to hold further consultations for the next phase of the action plan. And the government made a clear commitment in the Throne from the Speech to start a new phase in the action plan. So those consultations were constructive and valid. Yes, but in what way were they different from the ones the committee held? You read the report yourself. Why do you think it was necessary, and in what way was it different? Did you consult different organizations? It's my impression that you met the same people. Well, we met, yes, many of the same people, but at the same time, there were online consultations, so that was an opportunity for all Canadians to intervene and to speak and to share their thoughts with myself and Minister Werner on official languages. But then there were other specific issues that we wanted to raise. For example, immigration, demographic changes, economic issues, modernization. And the minister wanted to provide stakeholders and organizations with another opportunity to share their perspectives before they moved on to the next phase of the action plan. And that was my mandate, and I was very pleased to carry it out. Why didn't you meet us? We missed you. Why didn't you come and meet our committee? Well, I'm meeting you. No, but I mean during the process. We had things to say. We met people. I could have. You're right, I could have quite easily met with you. But I had a rather strict timeline, a specific mandate, and I was told to meet with organizations throughout the country. I know that the minister feels that you do very good work. I think she presumed that you had done very good work. She had your report already. And so my purpose was to meet other organizations. Well, we would have liked to meet you. In any case, when we traveled throughout the country, there was one issue that came up frequently, and that was the issue of the Court Challenges program. People spoke to us about that everywhere. I presume the same happened throughout your consultations. Everywhere I went, yes, people raised it, absolutely. Then why is it in the report? Well, just allow me to finish. People spoke to me about it, but that wasn't the dominant issue that was discussed. Yes, it was discussed, but people were very happy to speak about other issues as well. Now, it is true that many people said and repeated that they would like the Court Challenges program to be reinstated. People made other comments as well, and if you go to page 19 in the report, I could find you the actual line. Well, Mr. Law, you're telling me that many people raised this. So what I would like to know then is why do you not talk about it in your report? I mean, it was discussed so frequently that we had to discuss it frequently here as well. And I am sure you did so. But if you look on page 19 of the report. I'll just try and find that line for you, and I'll conclude on that. On page 20, rather. To build capacity, it says, community organizations would like more support from the government. Some participants suggested that a program be put in place to address the need for conflict mediation and a resolution with regard to language rights, with a component providing for the defense and promotion of language rights before the courts under exceptional circumstances. So we discussed programs such as this one. I didn't name it, but I did discuss that. It is something that did arise. I made recommendations on other issues. Now, given that this is a case that is before the courts, it was before the courts and it still is before the courts, I chose not to actually make a specific recommendation on that. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez, and we'll now move on to the Bloc Québécois, Mr. Richard Nadeau. Good morning, Mr. Laure, and welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Laure, I'd like to hear your comments on this. Is it bilingualism that is in danger in Canada, or is it French? Well, your question is assuming that it's one or the other, and I don't necessarily share that perspective, so I can't choose. I believe that the French language is alive and well in Canada, so is bilingualism, but they are facing challenges for both bilingualism and the French language. And official language communities are facing many challenges throughout the country. That is why I think that the Government of Canada has an important role to play, and so do other governments in Canada. They need to support those minority language communities. And that's why I accepted the mandate that was given to me, because this is an issue that I hold dear to my heart. Official languages is part of our identity, and I accepted this mandate in order to be able to contribute in some way. You were premier of a province that is officially bilingual. You come from a province where there is a significant French language community. Since 1951, the French language has been disappearing, and we don't see any mention in your report of the importance of making sure that the French language flourishes throughout provinces and within the Quebec nation. Do not feel for example, in our official languages, we traveled in 2006, and we looked at all possible measures that could be taken, all possible mechanisms that could be used to make sure that children whose first language is French learn English, but also to make sure that French itself can survive assimilation, which is a very serious threat. The further you move, the further you are from Quebec. So I want to know if that issue arose during your consultations. Did you go and actually meet people who are involved in advocacy groups, for example, for the French language in Quebec and in other languages? And did you try to find out what the needs of these communities are and those organizations in order to make sure that the French language endures in North America?
Thank you very much for that question. Throughout the country, I met with people who daily dedicate themselves to helping minority communities develop, grow, flourish, both socially, economically, culturally, and to build institutions that will help and support those communities in the future. I met with representatives from BC all the way to Nova Scotia. And when I went to Quebec, the people that we met with mainly were representatives of Anglophone minority communities within Quebec. And obviously we did meet with them when we were in Quebec. In order to answer your question in a more specific way, did I meet with people whose mission it was to defend the French language within Quebec? No, I did not, because that wasn't part of my mandate as such. But those people were nonetheless invited to take part in the consultations through the internet. That said, I met with people who, as I said, are dedicated to fighting vigorously, defending vigorously the fact that their children, ensure that their children can be educated in French. They recognize the challenges for linguistic minority communities in Canada. In the same perspective, we in the federal government, in the public service, have positions called French positions or bilingual positions that are occupied by unilingual Anglophones, and this is a problem. Did you take the time to meet with public servants, the Public Service Commission, to see how? Because we know that it's in the plan for the official languages in order to look at all that aspect to ensure that anybody who wishes to have services in French from the federal government can access those services in French, and that those designated positions to meet the French needs are not currently being filled by French people. Did you meet with those individuals, and how could you help to resolve that problem? The short answer to your question is no, and simply because it wasn't in my mandate. I did not have the mandate to meet with everyone, and the time that I had for my mandate was a specific time within which to meet with community organizations throughout the country. The government, in my opinion, is well aware of its obligations, and other people, including this committee, which has done work at that level, the Commissioner for Official Languages as well, with whom I met and who I'm meeting today as well. And I would say that he wanted to meet with me before, and their work is to oversee consultations with community groups. That was my mandate. That's the mandate that I accepted and the mandate that I fulfilled. And one last thing, the Court Challenges program, which we referred to earlier, last week I met with Quebec Community Groups Network, which told me that they too, in their meeting with you, stressed the importance of restoring this program without taking a position in terms of cases before the courts. How can you say that this wasn't an appropriate program and not put it in your report, something that has been reflected in the last 3 reports of the Official Languages Commissioner, who met with the communities on the needs of communities and groups with regard to minority rights and so forth? How is it that you didn't even mention it in your report? Well, as I said earlier, and I'm pleased to repeat it because I feel that I'm going to be asked this question again, I heard those comments in some of the interviews that I had, and it's true that when we were in Montreal, representatives of the Anglophone community there told me that also for them. They really liked the idea of having the program that existed previously, and I mentioned it. That's why I wrote on page 20 of the report that groups wanted something similar. And that's what I say on page 20, is that there are other options than simply restoring the program that previously existed. That was not, as you know, part of the plan as such. It was another thing, and that was used in some circumstances. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to add a little parentheses. The program, the Court Challenges program, which existed before, gave access to the courts, but it is possible to defend your rights without having such a program as the Court Challenges program. We have to make a distinction between the two, I understand, and I said before, that some groups clearly indicated that for them this was a tool, an important tool, in fact, to help them defend their rights before the courts. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Now we will go with Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Mr. Lord. to our meeting on the official languages. In your mandate, did you give a preliminary report to the minister before the final report?
Dans le mandat, dans le travail que j'ai fait,
Well, in the work that I did, there were different stages. There was a work that was done to give a report on the consultations that happened on the web. There was a draft report that was prepared. Just 2 seconds, Mr. Chair. Who did you give this account to? To the minister? To the department? Well, there were a number of reports. I had to give a summary to the minister. That was my work, and that's what I did. So you did? Yes? And what date did you give this summary before the final report? Well, I don't know the exact dates. I don't have them with me, but the final report was ready before the end of February, and I worked on the report with the assistance that I had throughout the month of January and February. The consultations took place, if you remember, during December. And there were online consultations that ended at the end of December, if I remember, 23rd of December, if I remember correctly. Then we gave a summary. I'll give you the details, if I may, Mr. Godin. We gave the summary of the online consultations once we had our event here in Ottawa. And at the end of January, there were discussions. Then I met with people who had not been there initially. And that is why, instead of ending at the end of, or by February, I did it at the end of February. So there are people who responded to you on the website, and you had met with people in Toronto and Vancouver. Yes. So it's right, then, when it says...
He handled his draft report into Heritage Minister José Verner's office and had a chance to speak to the minister about his recommendation. Then that was facts, right?
Non, parce
No?
qu'eux faisaient référence à ce moment-là.
No, because at that point they were referring to the final report, and the final report had not... there was no summary of the final report. No, excuse me, Mr. Chair, may I table this for the committee? It's the draft report, and afterwards it continues to say...
issue, and they know what I think about them, said Lord. They have an idea what I think should be included in the budget, but it's their decision. They were talking about the draft report, un ébauche. Êtes-vous d'accord avec ça?
Ben,
Do you agree? I'm not the one who wrote the article in the Telegraph Journal, so I don't know. Mr. Lord, I want to know if you gave a draft to the minister. Mr. Godin, I said to you earlier that the final report was submitted to the minister at the end of February, and throughout the process, I was working with people who, throughout the process, there were people from the minister's office who were at the consultations, people who provided support to me during this process and who were aware of what was going on. That's not my question, Mr. Lord. Did you? No. No, based on what I said earlier. Well, perhaps you could let the witness respond instead of asking questions. Well, Mr. Chair, he's saying that there were people who were working with him and who reported on what was going on. No, I'm talking specifically about the report. According to your report, the results had to be presented in a written report at the end of February. So according to your contract that you were paid for, did you give a written report to the minister, yes or no? I must say that I haven't yet been paid. No, seriously. Seriously. Perhaps you have a problem getting payment from the federal government, but that's not my question. The question is clear. Was there a report given to the minister, a draft report? I'm pleased to answer your question. I don't understand why you're so aggressive this morning. Well, you're the one who wasn't paid. I don't know. Well, no. You're concerned with my non-payment, and I appreciate your sentiments there. But very seriously now, the mandate that I accepted was the mandate to chair this process. There was a change in the contract because I accepted to meet with people who were not included in my initial mandate, and I agreed without changing the payment, since you talked about payments. And there were drafts that were prepared throughout the process. I gave the final report at the end of February. Did the department have drafts before? Yes, I said so earlier. Okay, so how can you explain the fact that the spokesperson for Ms. Werner says, but he didn't have a pre-report, there was no interference from the department? You had discussions. And perhaps you think I'm excited this morning, but I want to understand. I said aggressive, says Mr. Lord. No, but there was no interference. If you want to talk about interference, there wasn't any at all, because the final report was in my hands. So I take the responsibility for the final report based on the mandate that I had. I discussed this with the minister throughout the process when we were here on the 24th of January during the wrap-up event. I was there. And if you think that I didn't talk to the minister throughout the process, and yet you can say, well, at the wrap-up event you were sitting next to the minister. Well, of course I was. I did talk to her. But there was a pre-report. The minister was aware of the pre-report. There was a final report, and that's what I want to know. And yet the department says there was no pre-report. What I'm telling you, Mr. Godin, and I want to help you here, that's why I accepted your invitation to be here this morning, and what I'm telling you is that there were consultations that began in early December. There were consultations on the Internet as well. We reported on the Internet consultations in January on the Internet. During the 24th of January meeting, we gave a summary on January 24th. I think it was the 24th. It was either the 24th or 25th here in Ottawa. And all the participants who were there received a summary, a very preliminary summary of what had happened in the consultations. There were drafts prepared. I gave the signed final report at the end of February. Thank you, Mr. Godin. And now we'll go to the government side with Mr. Denis Lebel. Welcome at the same time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's the first time for me to be a member of this committee on official languages, but it's also a first, perhaps, for the city of Roberval, isn't it, Mr. Lord? Two natives of Roberval here, one as a witness and the other as a government representative. It's probably a first. And also it's an honor to have you here as a former premier and former native of Roberval. So I want to say it's a great honor for Roberval. So I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues. Today, Mr. Lord, I salute the work that you did. I salute the work that you've done. And I think you have an excellent knowledge of the official languages in Canada, and that is why we have the excellent results we have here today. And our government is proud to continue to work with the recommendations that you've made. So we have a government for whom accountability and clear decision-making and transparency is important. You're talking about establishing a process where we should have something objective and quantifiable with regard to accountability. I'd like to hear your comments on this. Well, I want to thank you very much for that introduction, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. I was born in Roberval. It's a very important city for my mother, who is still proud of being from Lac Saint-Jean, and who wanted all her children to be born on the shores of this lake, and so I really appreciate your introduction of me this morning. The question of accountability and having clear and measurable objectives stated in Recommendation 13 was clear to me in having a plan such as this. And I'd like to mention that when we had our consultations, I asked that question. That question was asked to the participants. And the participants, perhaps not all of them, but most of them, were also in agreement that we had to establish clear, measurable objectives in order to see what would happen after 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, depending on what was set out in the next action plan. I expect it to be a 5-year plan. And to see the evolution and the progress achieved, and to be able to measure whether the investments that are being made by the government with taxpayers' money is leading to the expected results. surely you are aware of the measures that are currently in place. What do you have to say to us about those measures? Well, there are measures in place that are good. Throughout the process, I tried to avoid being a partisan in the sense that I didn't want the report to demolish or criticize what was there before, because the objective was really to take what had been done and build on that. And that is why I refer in the report to the new strategy, the next step of the action plan, and not a new action plan or a total change. We saw a desire throughout the country to build on what had already been accomplished. I think that everybody agreed, there was a consensus that we can build measurable objectives to quantify what had been done and to look back at the progress that had been achieved, because you can measure progress, and minority communities can help the government and communities measure the impact of the strategy and the action plan. And to that end, the discussions that I have had with the minister confirm that the minister and the government have an interest in ensuring that the plan will be usable and will provide accountability. There are surely very specific sectors where we have to adjust our aim, and we want to ensure that we're meeting the needs. Do you have anything specific about some sectors to tell us? Well, yes, there are some things that came out of the consultations, both with regard to the strategy and the implementation of that strategy. With regard to the strategy, one of the things that I wanted specifically to mention was with regard to arts and culture. Throughout the country, there was a desire, and for me it was also an important issue, to ensure that there was a specific section in the action plan dedicated to arts and culture, because arts and culture, and I hope that we'll have the opportunity to talk more about this, is an area that helps minority communities flourish, develop, and grow together, and to show others who they are. It's a window into their lives. With regard to the implementation, one of the things that came out in all the meetings was the fact that some of the organizations felt, well, the words that they used were that they felt like beggars. So every year they had to go back and ask for more. They never had the certainty that they would be able to plan long term. And a number of organizations and agencies wanted to have a funding mechanism that was set on a longer term basis so that they could spend more of their time then doing the work that they wanted to do instead of filling out forms and trying to do what the government was asking them to do. So I think it's important to ensure a balance, because the taxpayers, which are providing the money to the government, must have the certainty that the money is used as anticipated, while at the same time it has to be done as efficiently as possible to ensure that community organizations can work in the areas in which they wish to work. So this is something that came out of those meetings. I also mentioned it in the wrap-up meeting that occurred here in Ottawa. I think we need to find other ways to ensure that the plan is implemented to make things simpler and more efficient. And this would be a way to clearly improve on what was done previously, both in terms of the strategy with arts and culture, both in tactical terms, with regard to the implementation of that strategy. Thank you very much. So this completes the first round of 7 minutes, and now we'll begin our second round with the official opposition and Mr. Denis Coderre. Mr. Coderre. Good day, Mr. Lord. I think that you're not in a good position to say that the previous plan was a bad plan, because you signed it when you were Premier of New Brunswick, and I think it was a good plan that helped your province. I want to come back to your mandate, because ultimately you didn't meet with the Public Service Alliance, and when you talked about your mandate, it was quite a broad mandate, and I think that I'm getting the impression that it would have been important to consult the public service, which is important for linguistic duality. So for me, it's not an action plan. It's a public relations exercise that you were involved in. And if this isn't part of the action plan, this means that Ms. Werner had already written the report, her report, and that finally you didn't necessarily have any influence over what you were going to propose. That said, I want to come back to what my colleague talked about earlier with regard to the report. You're talking about a pre-report and the fact that you had a draft, to use the word used in the Chronicle. In other words, there was a written draft. With regard to the final report, was the draft the same?
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Coderre.
Thank you, Mr. Coderre. If I may, I'd like to raise some of the points that you also mentioned before getting to your question. No, I'd like you to answer my question, says Mr. Coderre. Mr. Lord says, I'd like you to let me answer those other elements. Please answer my question, says Mr. Coderre. Mr. Coderre, says Mr. Lord, it's very important to ensure that all the information is given, because if there were things in your statement before your question, I would like, as a committee, to have the time, that your committee give me the time to respond to those elements. So you don't agree with my premise. Is the pre-report and the report the same? I think it's very important that this is part of what I say in my response, because you premised your question with that statement. So I want to... My time is precious, says Mr. Coderre. I've only got 5 minutes. Please answer my question. Was the pre-report, Mr. Chair, please ask the witness to answer my question. Mr. Coderre, please give the witness time to answer your question. My question is then, what's the difference between the pre-report and the report?
Mr. Coderre, I'd first like to state that I appreciate the fact that you confirmed that, yes, certain agreements had been signed and they did have a positive impact. Now, you have my final report before you. There were changes between the first draft and the final report. Of course, I think that's absolutely normal. When you work on a report, you end up with a final report that is signed, and that is the final document. That is absolutely normal. Fine. In that case, you met Minister Werner, and there was $1 billion that appeared out of nowhere. Were you told to just put that into this, that it would be a good thing? Well, once again, Mr. Coderre, you're presuming things, and you're implying things in your question that are false. So your questions are very tendentious. I'm trying to help you in your work and give you information. The $1 billion didn't just come out of nowhere. That $1 billion was not recommended by the minister. And so you're trying to create an impression of something that doesn't exist. I was given a mandate by the minister and the government, and I was very pleased to fulfill that mandate, and I fulfilled it. The people who participated were very happy with this. Now, I understand that your time is precious. I'm sorry that there is no connection here, and I'm sorry. When there's a report, sure, everyone's happy to see you and everyone's happy to participate. But when you're talking about $1 billion, and you say in your report that that's important to have checks and balances, well, then that means that we have to know where the $1 billion comes from. You have a 37-page report, and you use the word I. You refer to yourself in there, so I assume you're the one who wrote it. Now, we're talking about $1 billion. That's a lot of money. We need to protect taxpayers. You want to protect taxpayers, and there's nothing in here that justifies that $1 billion. So where did the $1 billion come from? If it didn't come from the minister, where did it come from? Well, I'm the one who made the recommendation. And perhaps you think that $1 billion is too much. That's your opinion. But where does that $1 billion come from then, says Mr. Coderre? Well, as I pointed out in the report, I have made certain recommendations. Those are my recommendations, and that's why I say I recommend, because these are my recommendations. They come from myself. So if you're wondering why the word I is in there, it's because those recommendations come from myself. Your time has finished. And I'd just like to point out that I'm having difficulty in hearing the answers from our witness because he is being cut off constantly. So perhaps you could try and strike a balance. You can manage your own time as you wish. However, when the witness is speaking, I would suggest that you listen to him. Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as you know, under our standing orders, if we put a question to the witness has to answer within the time that we have. And so that is why, says the chair, that it is very important to not have everyone speaking at the same time. Mr. Lebel, if there is a leading question and if it presumes things that make the witness uncomfortable, then I think that it's important to listen to the witness in order to allow him to clarify the situation. Thank you. I think that you have made your point, and we'll now continue on the government side with Mr. Daniel Petit. Mr. Petit. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Law. I'd like to start out by thanking you for accepting our invitation. And second, we are neighbors in Ancienne Lorette, old neighbors. Perhaps people aren't aware of this. And you got as far as becoming the Premier of New Brunswick. I congratulate you on that. I have a question. You were given a mandate, and you read what we had already done. You said earlier in your opening remarks that you read our work, and those recommendations came out of a first trip that had been made in 25 years into these communities. There had been no trip throughout Canada like this in 25 years. We traveled from east to west, and at the time, we tried to determine what the situation was in these communities. Now, I remember having only gone into the east, into Mr. Godin's area. There were about 20 people who welcomed us, and they spoke to us on one issue only, on the Court Challenges program, and we went to other areas as well. Several questions were raised. Often the same issue was raised, that there is federal funding, and those organizations told us that not only do we receive federal funding, but we receive funding from other sources, for example, the private sector, provinces. So they spoke to us of the type of funding that they had for the community purposes, to support the communities. Now you can see what my question is going to be. There is a question of accountability here. There are several levels of accountability. I come from Quebec, and I'm very sensitive to the issue of becoming involved in education, for example. And the Court Challenges program that may deal with, say, Bill 101. I'm very sensitive also to the health sector. Now, in New Brunswick, you had extensive experience as Premier. You may have a different perspective, and without necessarily telling us about your province, could you speak to us on this? How do you see all those factors together? And where do you see accountability? It's all very well to put $1 billion, but there might be another $500 million that will come from elsewhere. So I'd like to hear you on the issue of accountability. You made several recommendations, and I'd like you to sort of bring those together, bring all that together, all these people who are working in the same direction. Thank you for your question. As you pointed out, it's important to protect provincial jurisdictions, and as a former Premier of New Brunswick, I agree with you. All too often in the past, the federal government has wanted to interfere in areas of provincial jurisdiction without even having been invited to do so. And that has created certain situations in this country. And so I congratulate the current government of Canada on wanting to respect provinces and respect their areas of jurisdiction. And I think that it has shown a new spirit of federalism because it's working in partnership with the provinces while respecting the Canadian Constitution, but while accepting that we live within a federation. And I think that is very important. I think it's a key factor for success for official languages and for other sectors, economic sectors, social sector. And that's why on page 24 in recommendation 10, I say I recommend that the new strategy for the next phase of the action plan be implemented in close collaboration with the provinces and territories, and that these partnerships respect jurisdictions and reflect the constitutional and legal responsibilities for each level of government. So, for example, let's take the health sector. That's one area that arose in these consultations. Official language minority communities would like to see improvement in this area, and I give various examples. I speak about the Réseau de Santé en Français, for example. That's a successful example. But all these things have to be done while respecting the Canadian Constitution and their respective areas of jurisdiction of the provinces and the federal government. So when you're establishing partnerships that respect those jurisdictions, I think that you end up with more solid and viable partnerships in the long run. And that's what the current government appears to want to do, and I congratulate them on this. Thank you, Mr. Laure. We'll now move on to the opposition with Mr. Raymond Gravel from the Bloc Québécois. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Laure, for coming today. I won't get into a lengthy preamble. I only have 5 minutes. So I'd like to come back to a question that my colleague asked you earlier. He asked you whether the French language or bilingualism was threatened in Canada, and you were saying neither one nor the other, that these were two realities that were alive and well. But in Quebec, we have required legislation to protect French in the province where we have the only Francophone majority. So I'm wondering how you can conclude then French is not threatened in those other provinces where there are minorities. Thank you, Mr. Gravel, for the question. I believe the question was which is more threatened than the other, and I responded that both face challenges. There are challenges, and I raised them in the report. I raised that fact that there are threats to the French language in minority language situations in the East and the West. And the English language also faces challenges within Quebec. In some areas, bilingualism, which is another reality, is also facing threats. For example, when governments decide to eliminate immersion programs, then that creates a challenge to bilingualism in some areas of the country. Thank you. I'll change topics now. I am very interested in seniors issues, and in your report you say you met seniors organizations, you met Francophone seniors and in Ontario, in Alberta. And I'd like to know about seniors living in homes, for example. Can they use their French? Can they live in French in situations where French is a minority language? Well, in some provinces, yes, they can. I met people who had built centers, had built healthcare centers for seniors, and have established centers where they can use their own language and live in their own language. In the West, for example. Now, in the East, there are also similar situations. New Brunswick is a bilingual province, so that's a specific situation. I met seniors, I listened to seniors, and I raised this. But I did ask myself at the time, should I make another recommendation? I decided to restrict my recommendations, but in terms of healthcare, you can look at it from a broad perspective as well, and I think it's important within that perspective to ensure that seniors can age and grow older in the language of their choice, and there is considerable work to be done in that area. Yes, it's already difficult to be old and perhaps to be sick as well, and on top of it, you may be living under the poverty line. And so it's a very insecure situation. And if on top of that you can't live in your own language, then that adds even more insecurity to the situation. It can lead to depression. It can even perhaps lead to premature death. I would agree with you, Mr. Gravel. Growing old and being sick can make one feel very, very insecure. And it becomes even more difficult when you cannot receive healthcare services in your own language and you feel even less secure in that type of situation. I'm sensitive to that. I heard that, and that's why I'm saying work has to be done in that area. I made rather broad recommendations, yes, consistent with my mandate, but I did note those points, and I'm happy to speak to those further today. Yes, because, you know, the senior population of seniors is growing considerably. Now, let's move back and talk about early childhood. As you know, Conservatives eliminated the daycare program, but this is an important program. It needs to be funded. You refer to it vaguely in your report, but I'd like to know what you think about that. Because it's often in early childhood that assistance is required for daycares, for example. The Government of Canada has established a program to help all children throughout Canada. They are giving that $100 a month in assistance, and that is one way of assisting families and children with the cost of daycare and other costs as well. That has been this government's decision in how it will assist families. Now, the issue of early childhood education was raised during our consultations. Many points were made. And when you look at this issue, the preparation for children's education, there are many things that can be done, but it has to be done in compliance with provincial jurisdictions. And Mr. Gravel, I'm sure that you're not suggesting that I should have suggested an early childhood program on the part of the federal government, because that would encroach upon provincial jurisdiction. If you are suggesting that, we can discuss that further. Let's move on now to our next speaker, Mr. Godin. Mr. Godin, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Law, who decided that you would hold an in-camera meeting? The department set up the meetings and the consultations. So that's how it happened. Well, you're asking who, and I'm telling you who. Oh, well, I like direct answers. I like direct questions, says Mr. Law. You made 14 recommendations. How do they differ from the recommendations of the Official Languages Committee? Well, I think you're in as good a position as I am to be able to identify those differences. The committee came up with a report. I don't remember how many recommendations there were. I think there were more than mine. And there is some overlap, yes. Well, just give me one important distinction between the two. Can you just name one significant difference? Well, I refer specifically to $1 billion. I think that's Minister Vernel that's calling you, actually. No, it's not. It's better than that. It's my wife. Well, we'll give you 5 minutes if you like then, says Mr. Godin. No, I'll turn off my phone instead. All right, we'll take that off Mr. Godin's time. Well, as I was saying, one specific recommendation, well, you could give me one or two. $1 billion. I clearly state that in my report. And that wasn't in your committee's report, but I know that your committee's mandate was different. But there is a certain amount of overlap. There are similar points that are made because people made similar points to you. And we consult people in order to hear them, to hear what they have to say. I did my work, and my work was to report on what people told me. And I took the liberty of making 14 recommendations. So you're not necessarily answering me. Besides the $1 billion, with all due respect, there isn't much that's different in your findings. Well, Mr. Godin, my mandate wasn't to find different conclusions or different observations from your own, but if you want, we can sit down and go through both reports and find the differences. Well, you were pleased to report on art and culture and make a recommendation, but as you know, that was one of our recommendations too, so there's nothing new to that. You put a question to me I'd like to answer. You said there's nothing new. Well, sure, it's new. It's new with respect to the former plan. My mandate wasn't to start your work over, and my mandate wasn't to stand out from your work necessarily. My mandate was to hold consultations, and that's what I did throughout the country. I fulfilled my mandate, and I'm pleased that I did that. But, Mr. Chairman, let's look at the numbers. I think about $850 million was put into the action plan. 810. Now, there's a shortfall.
Mais après ça, on arrive ici avec une recommandation nouvelle sur les arts et la culture. Alors, le calcul des argents est-tu un plan pareil? Ajouter les arts et la culture, ça devient 1 milliard. Facile à calculer, cela, là.
Monsieur Godin, je crois qu'il va falloir...
Si on met les arts et la culture, ça va coûter de l'argent.
Vous me posez une question, vous ne me laissez pas répondre. Il va falloir donner la chance à la ministre de dévoiler son plan. Et le travail que j'ai fait était un travail de consultation. Et j'ai consulté des gens qui m'ont dit toutes sortes de choses. Et certains de ces gens-là vous avaient dit la même chose. Mais je crois que c'est bon qu'on ait la chance d'entendre plus d'une fois des recommandations précises sur des choses importantes, entre autres les arts et la culture. Je me suis permis de faire la recommandation. J'ai dit que le milliard est un minimum. C'est au gouvernement, par la suite, de prendre vos recommandations, prendre mes recommandations.
Le chiffre d'1 milliard, est-ce que c'est les arts et la culture qui a amené ce chiffre d'1 milliard-là, juste rajouté au plan d'action qu'il y avait là avant? C'est où vous l'avez pris, votre milliard?
Le milliard, j'ai décidé de chiffrer le milliard et j'ai mis un minimum d'1 milliard parce que j'ai regardé les investissements qui avaient été faits dans le passé, qui étaient d'environ 810 millions de dollars. Le plan initial était 751 millions. Le gouvernement a investi à peu près 810. Et il y a d'autres éléments. Et sans avoir pris le temps de comptabiliser chaque chose, j'ai cru important de mettre un montant. J'ai voulu mettre 1 milliard et j'ai dit que c'était un minimum. Donc, si le gouvernement décide qu'ils ont besoin d'investir 1,1 milliard, tant mieux. Si c'est ça qu'ils ont besoin pour remplir les objectifs qui seront fixés dans le plan d'action. Mais je crois que pour soutenir les activités, pour rencontrer les objectifs que j'ai entendus, que je crois que sont bons, certains objectifs que j'ai mentionnés, 1 milliard est un minimum.
Parfait. Merci beaucoup, M. Godin. On va maintenant y aller du côté du Parti libéral avec M. Jean-Claude Damour.
Merci, Monsieur Lord, d'être présent.
Thank you, Mr. Lord, for being with us. You mentioned a few things. You said that your work was a consultation. Did you have a team, a finance team, people who helped you to quantify things in terms of dollar amounts? Yes or no? Did you have a team? Well, the work that I did, I had people from the department who were supporting me in the process, who were there during the consultations. Okay, earlier you answered one of my colleague's questions, Mr. Godin's questions. You said that you based your figures on past figures in order to come up with this $1 billion figure. That's what you said approximately word for word. You said you based yourself on past figures to come up with this $1 billion figure. What's a bit strange about all this, Mr. Lord, is that just before I began asking my questions, I consulted our analyst who confirmed that we're not even currently able to know over the last 2 years, year for year, the amounts that had been invested, some people will say spent instead of invested, with regard to the Action Plan on Official Language. So if we can't identify those amounts, could you explain to me how you were able to identify the amounts that were in fact spent over the last few years? Well, I'd be pleased to do so. First of all, the figures that were used, and when I said earlier that I looked at the investments that had been made, that is, expenditures made in the last 5-year action plan, and other elements that were added, and I understand that $1 billion was a minimum amount in order to reach those objectives. The information that I had obtained, I had asked from people who were working with me from the department. Mr. Lord, you're saying that you analyzed things, you based yourselves on the past 5 years on a dollar amount, but over the past 2 years, year for year, when you did your analysis, surely you looked at the last 2 financial years, how much money was spent, how much was spent over the last 2 years in the action plan. I'd be pleased, but I don't have any figures with me. I could ask that information from the people who are working with me. I learned that there was $751 million that was set out for a 5-year period, and $810 million was in fact invested. I don't have the exact figures for the last 2 years. But, Mr. Lord, that's a forecast. It's not necessarily mean that that money has been spent or invested. What I'm asking you is that you did your analysis. You based yourself on figures that amounts that were invested over the last few years. But you say perhaps you have those figures. Our analyst isn't able to identify those amounts, not amounts that were budgeted, but rather amounts that were invested in the communities under the Official Languages Action Plan. So over the last few years, in order to have a logical conclusion here, because we know that there'll be a third, fourth year, fifth year, and so on, and you looked at the figures to come up with this $1 billion amount. But what did you base your figures on in coming up with this figure? What amounts were spent over the last 2 years? Don't tell me about the budgets. I want to know how much was spent in coming up with this $1 billion amount. So if it was such a great big analysis, why couldn't you find $2.5 million for the Core Challenges program? Well, the questions aren't at all related. Those are two completely separate issues. If, as I said, the information that I received and the information that I requested, my report was submitted before the end of the fiscal year, so we'll have to wait for the Auditor General's report to find out how much money was exactly was invested. There is a Public Accounts Committee here, and you could ask the question to that committee to find out where exactly the money was spent and how much. But you asked me two questions. Please allow me the time to answer. I took this information. I used the information that I was given. Is it possible to know before the end of the fiscal year how much money exactly was spent? Well, you'll agree with me that the answer is no, because the fiscal year wasn't over yet. So I based myself on the information that I had that had been provided, that is estimates, money that was to be spent and was spent over that 5-year period. But just to come back to this issue, Mr. Damour, says the chair, but with regard to the Core Challenges program, the 2006-2007 year, the figures are out. So how much was invested in the action plan on official languages? And you're saying the figures aren't final, and your report was tabled before the end of the fiscal year. Well, for 2006-2007, how much was invested in with regard to the official languages program? I would ask the witness to conclude. I would say that my report was finished before the end of the fiscal year. I don't have the figures with me for 2006-2007. Thank you very much. I forgot to say that we had begun the third round of questions. I had just Mr. Damour on my list, so if there are any other people who wish to speak, please let me know. We'll continue with the Bloc Québécois. Mr. Nadeau. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lord, your mandate was to meet with the communities, but we know that you also met with the linguistic industry, the language industry, which is much different from the linguistic minority communities, because it's a different field, if you will, in terms of the action plan. The fact that you met with the language community, was this of your own doing, or was this something that you had been given on a possible list of potential people? Well, some representatives from the language industry were part of the consultation groups that we met with, and the list was prepared by the department. The invitations were handed out by the department. Some people, some groups asked me directly if they could meet with me, and I agreed, including with members of the language community, and I agreed to meet with them. And the decision to meet with some individuals, some groups, at the same time, or in addition to the other groups that I was chairing, that was my decision. So at that moment, I know that some of those people, among the groups that you met with, are people from this region, from the Outaouais region on the Quebec side. Was there a particular reason at that point why you decided, or why you did not put on your list federal public servants. Obviously, those working in the areas of official languages. As I mentioned, the list of participants for the consultations that took place from Vancouver to Halifax, this list was prepared by the department. The mandate that I was given was to chair and to lead those consultations, which I did. I received some requests to meet with certain groups or people, and I accepted some of those. I don't remember if I was asked, if I got any requests that I refused. I'll have to check. But I don't remember if there was a union or a public servant group or something like that that asked to meet with me. In your report, and with all due respect for your talents in this area, but it brings forward nothing new compared to the third report that we had published following our trip around Canada in the fall of 2006. So the only thing that that is out of the ordinary is with regard to the funding. I worked for some time for the Fédération de la Jeunesse, and people were saying several billion dollars had to be sent in order to ensure equality between French and English in Canada. So we're going back to a time when assimilation was not necessarily such a great horror. So in your report, you put forward this $1 billion figure. And there had been $802 million, $810 million that was invested for the last 5-year period. You say that this is the minimum amount necessary, and the sky's the limit. Maybe. But how did you come up with that figure? And you lived in that milieu, in the Francophonie of Acadia. I grew up in Ontario. There's so much to do. Why $1 billion? Why not more? Why that figure? How did you come up with that figure? Well, as I said earlier, when I prepared the report on the consultations and I was preparing the summary of what I had heard with regard to the questions that we'd asked, some of the things that I think are important with regard to education, for example, arts and culture and health. And I looked at the investments that had been made, the expenditures made by the government, set out for that 5-year period by the government, and I think it was important to have it come up with a minimum amount. I have also said in other places, in other interviews, that the $1 billion amount, if the government did decide to invest $1 billion over 5 years, would allow priorities to be established and choices to be made. And that is the role of a government. Yes, but a last question, Mr. Lord, please. Thank you, Mr. Nadeau. Thank you very much.
Government with Michael Chong.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lord, for your testimony. You say in your report that the education system is extremely important, and that the last government said the same thing in 2003 when it created the action plan.
The previous government indicated the same thing in 2003 when they created the action plan on official languages, that the education system was critical in this. And at the time, they set a 10-year goal of doubling the number of bilingual graduates, bilingual students in Canada. And at the time, in 2003, approximately 1/4 or 25% of all students were bilingual, functionally bilingual. and they set a goal of doubling the number of students to about 50% by 2013. So my first question is, the first action plan on official languages provided investments to meet these targets. How effective was it in getting to that goal by 2013?
Well, thank you very much for the question. The data that we saw in the last census seems to indicate that the government and the country, frankly, is not close to that target. And the support for learning languages is important. There's a partnership that is essential with provincial governments because education is, as you know, primarily a provincial responsibility, and as well a partnership that must extend to parents. What I heard across the country is that in many situations you have parents that will wait in line, sometimes for days, to make sure that their children, their child, their son or daughter can enroll in an immersion program. And what we see across the country is that there are a lot of parents that understand that languages are great tools for the development of their children. I think the setting goals is noble, but the goals must be realistic as well. I could say today I want to play golf like Tiger Woods in 5 years. I don't think it's going to happen. I wish it did, but it's not going to happen. So just setting goals by itself is not enough.
If we
need to be realistic goals.
Thank you. If we were at 25 or 24% in 2003, do you have any idea where we are at today?
I don't have the exact number with me, but I know it came up in the consultations, and we're not close to 50 or 70%. And I must say, Mr. Trong, that when I was Premier of New Brunswick, we had set a goal of 70% in the province of New Brunswick, and the province of New Brunswick is not yet reaching that goal either. I actually think it'll be more difficult now than it was before because the government of New Brunswick has decided to eliminate the early immersion program. I think it will go contrary to that objective. What we see is parents want to make sure that their children learn, of course, their first language properly, but also more and more parents realize the benefits of learning a second language. And I think more and more parents realize a third and fourth language in this world in the 21st century is an asset for the child. It's an asset for us all.
Could you tell us how the recommendations in your report will help us increase the number of bilingual graduates?
Yes, there is. The recommendation number 1 precisely deals with education, and the education in the, I should find it in the English version, of the first language, but as well the education of the other official language. And I think it's important to ensure that we have programs that work in collaboration with provinces, with school districts, to support learning of the other official language, and I think languages overall. I think Canada is great with 2 official languages, but with the wealth of knowledge that we have coming from immigrants that come from around the world, the opportunities we have for more Canadians to learn even more languages is an opportunity that I think we need to seize as a country that will help us, as I say, for the individuals that speak more than 1 or 2 or 3 languages, but as well for the country to have individuals that speak more than 1, 2, or 3 languages.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chung, for raising the important issue of education, which you convinced the whole committee that it's an important issue for linguistic duality. Okay, alors on va maintenant continuer avec Monsieur.
Now we'll continue with Mr. Gaudin. 5 minutes, questions and comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You said earlier that you decided, was it you who decided to change the terms of your contract in order to meet with other individuals? And you say you weren't paid for that and you're not asking to be paid for that. That's your own problem. It's not my problem. But were you the one who decided to meet with those people? Well, a contract can only be changed when both parties agreed. When both parties agree, the minister agreed that you could change the contract? Yes. So you said you met with language industries. Who told you that the language industries wanted to meet with you? Well, they wrote to me. They wrote you. Okay. And the public service, the School of Public Service wrote to you and you said no. Didn't you think it was important in your consultation process? Well, as I said earlier, Mr. Godin, I didn't agree to meet with all the people who requested to meet with me. But how did you decide? Who decided? I did. So the School of the Public Service was a group that you decided yourself that you did not want to meet with. That wasn't important. Well, what I decided to meet with some groups or individuals, and I said earlier that it was my decision alone, and I decided not to meet with them. Why didn't you think it was important to meet with the School of Public Service? I didn't say it wasn't important, Mr. Godin. I said that I agreed to meet with some individuals or groups because I wanted to meet with them. There were other people that I decided not to meet with because I thought some people fit better with the consultation process that I was undertaking and others not so much. And the government has been in place since January 23rd, 2006. There was the former action plan. There were all the studies from the Official Language Committee. There's nothing in the budget that we had in March. The money will come later. You're having consultations to ensure that the minister can come up with figures. And you said people were very pleased that you were going to...
Vous me posez la question. Moi, je suis très content du gouvernement actuel.
Ah, je n'en doute pas, ça, je suis d'accord avec vous. Très, très content.
Puis, ça me fait plaisir de le dire, parce que c'est un gouvernement qui remplit ses promesses, qui prend ses engagements au sérieux, qui a fait un engagement dans le discours du trône et qui s'est engagé à faire des consultations additionnelles, ce qu'ils ont fait. Le budget de M. Flaherty indique qu'il va y avoir des suites. Les sommes sont... Ce sera la ministre, puis au ministre de donner ces détails-là. C'est pas moi. Moi, je suis ici en mon nom personnel aujourd'hui, M. Godin. Je ne représente pas le gouvernement.
Mais c'est un gouvernement, par exemple, qui a coupé les contestations judiciaires, ou que partout qu'on a été au Canada, de Terre-Neuve jusqu'à Vancouver, nous en parler. Une des choses les plus importantes, et M. Laure, vous avez dit, les gens, s'ils veulent aller à la Cour, ça reste à eux. C'est un gouvernement qui était se défendre à Fredericton à la Cour avec les communautés minoritaires, puis qui a dit, si on gagne la cause, on veut que c'est vous autres qui la payent, la cause. Est-ce que Mme Paulette Tracadie-Shaila aurait pu aller devant la Cour pour les contestations judiciaires, sans les contestations judiciaires, et gagner la cause contre la GRC au Nouveau-Brunswick? Pensez-vous que c'est un bon gouvernement avec les coupures qui ont enlevé l'outil principal des minorités pour être capable d'aller faire respecter la loi? Et en plus de ça, l'avocat du gouvernement du département du ministère de la Justice a même dit c'est pas à la Cour de décider si on viole la loi ou pas, c'est aux citoyens à nous mettre à la porte s'ils ne sont pas contents de notre ouvrage. Êtes-vous d'accord avec tout ce que c'est que votre gouvernement que vous aimez bien a dit à la communauté minoritaire?
Monsieur
Godin. That was a very lengthy preamble, but not everything contained in that preamble is true. You know perfectly well that it's true. No, I'm going to be very clear. I know that many of the things you're saying are not true. What then? What isn't true? The chair is asking for the witness to be allowed to speak. Well, I want to know. You said I had a few minutes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Godin. In your preamble, you make many points. Now, if you want to talk about the RCMP in New Brunswick, I'll speak to that. I was Premier at the time, and police services in New Brunswick have to be provided in both official languages throughout the province. No exceptions allowed, including in the municipalities that don't have other services in both official languages. They have to provide police services in both official languages. And that was the outcome of the new official languages legislation in 2002 there. Now, if people want access to the courts, they do have access to the courts, with or without the Court Challenges program. Yes, but they don't necessarily have the means. There are people who have the means. Who? Many communities find the means. Mr. Godin, I have already stated that the Court Challenges program was useful for some, but there were other cases that were not successful under the Court Challenges program. And that's normal, obviously. But it is just as normal that in certain cases, parties will ask the other party to cover their costs. Now, I believe that the court can even request that the government cover certain costs under current legislation. So it depends on the circumstances. Thank you, and thank you to our witness, Mr. Laure, and to Mr. Godin. Now, this would be our fourth and final round. We'll move to the official opposition. Mr. Murphy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Laure, for coming today before the committee. I am a tourist today. I used to actually be a member, but today I'm just visiting. And I'm pleased to hear that you have close ties with the city of your birth. And I hope that you will remain in Moncton, and I hope you will be there. Hope you will remain there for a long time. Now, seriously, Mr. Laure, we know that you were a diplomat, and in 1999 you were part of the Francophonie Summit. I was there too. You were a champion for language rights in your province, and I appreciate that. I don't think that we have any, at least I don't, have any argument with your position on official languages in New Brunswick. Not at all. And so I'd like to congratulate you on your perspective on official languages. However, I am somewhat concerned by your report and the lack of mention of the Court Challenges program. Luc Desjardins in the Acadie Nouvelle wrote that your report remains silent on the requests of minority language communities on the Court Challenges program. He states in the article that Mr. Laure heard throughout his meetings and throughout the country this issue, and he promised to make recommendations on the issues raised. Now, I read that in the press. I know that mistakes can be made in the press. I don't know how frequently. But I'd like to ask you if it's true that you heard complaints about the elimination of that program throughout all your meetings. And I'd also like to know if it's true that you promised to make recommendations on those issues. Thank you for the question. And it's a great pleasure to see you here today. It's true that we have worked well in the past together. And I look forward to returning to my hometown in your riding. And it will be a great pleasure to be there and to work along with you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we held several consultations, and there were several main meetings. I'm not talking about the smaller consultations that I held, but in those main meetings, yes, the issue of the Court Challenges program was raised, and similar mechanisms were raised elsewhere. Mr. Desjardins refers to promises in his article. Well, I didn't make any promises. I made a commitment to fulfill my mandate, and I said I would make recommendations. Now, when I noted that there was a case before the courts dealing with that issue already, I chose to leave this. The positions were clear, and I spoke on page 20. I believe it's on page 19 in the French version. I made the recommendations I did, and I chose not to deal specifically with that. I understand that. And there are comforting words, yes, in your report.
Place to address the need for conflict mediation and resolution with regards to language rights, with a component providing for the defense and promotion of language rights. You put it in your suggested solutions. Does it mean, Mr. Lord, that you see, as I think some of the members of the government do, that there might be a tranche, or a slice that promotes mediation of disputes which is short of the restoration of the court challenges program. Do you envisage that?
Well, in fact, there was a recommendation that was made when we were in Moncton, when we had one of the consultation sessions in Moncton, where one of the participants that I will not name because but I know exactly who it was, and suggested something very similar to what is here. And I felt it was a good idea, and that's why I wanted to be in the report, because I wanted to reflect the fact that across the country people mentioned the need to have a program, whether it was the same program or a similar program, but it was a different approach that was being suggested, an approach that I'd heard in other places as well, and that could be a way to deal with conflicts without always going to court. That going to court may not be the first step, but there may be other steps to take.
Merci beaucoup, messieurs. Alors...
Thank you, gentlemen. We will now move on to the Parliamentary Secretary, Mr. Pierre Lemieux. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Law, to our committee. I'd like to congratulate you on the excellent work that you undertook throughout your consultations. I've listened closely to my colleagues, and I'd like to hear your comments on their comments. First, with respect to the draft report, it is truly normal that a government receive draft reports. When the Official Languages Commissioner prepares a report, that commissioner sends a copy to the government, and the same applies to the Auditor General. So there's nothing strange in that process. That's a normal process. Mr. Nadeau and Mr. Godin put questions to you on the usefulness of your own report. But I would say this. If there is overlap between your report and the committee's report, that is a good thing, because what it is saying is that we're both going in the right direction. Second, organizations in our official language minority communities are professional and they are well organized, and this is reflected in that overlap because they're coming to us with the same messages and they're remaining focused on the same message. That is a good thing. Third, governments are receiving the same message from these groups, so all these messages are converging, and that is a good thing. So there is nothing strange in that either. I would like to hear you on an important issue, and that is immigration. Especially in official language communities, because that is a very important issue. Could you tell us what you heard throughout your consultations? And can you tell us what types of specific recommendations these communities put to you, or what you would recommend to us in order to improve that situation? Thank you, Mr. Lemieux, for your question. I'll just comment on your preamble briefly. I don't want to presume on what members are implying, but if I reported points that were absolutely contradictory to your report, well, then they would be asking me why it's so contradictory. And if there were no consultations, I think some people might have said, why isn't the government undertaking any consultations? That's the reality, but this is a useful debate, and it's an important debate in a country like this where we have a strong democratic system that allows for people to put questions. And I'm happy that they're doing that. And I think that's probably why many people want to immigrate to Canada. So the issue of immigration was raised several times throughout our consultations. There were two aspects to this. There was the issue of immigration, but there was also the issue of migration. That is, Canadians were moving from one part of the country to another. And what came out of our discussions was this, on migration and immigration of Francophones. It's important for immigrants to feel welcome and comfortable, but also for them to be well informed of the choices that lie before them. That is to say, the choice to send their children to a French school or an English school. And what was often raised was the fact that immigrants come, they settle, and then it's only perhaps 6 months, a year and a half later that they get the information on the choices that were available to them from the outset. And they may have made different choices had they received that information earlier. So it's important to ensure that immigrants are well informed of the options before them. And that was an issue that was raised several times. There was also the issue of supporting Francophone immigration into minority areas. For example, Manitoba, if I recall correctly, has a goal of 7%, I believe, of Francophone immigrants, even if the Francophone population in Manitoba is under 5%. So that's one example of a province that is actively working on immigration and is seen as being a good model. So it's important to welcome these immigrants and to lay out their options clearly before them so they can make the right choices. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lemieux. You were only 5 seconds short of your time. We'll now move on to Mr. Nadeau. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Law, I'd just like to remind you about a point. Last June at the Sommet de la Francophonie in Ottawa, I was there, and Minister Werner made her announcement. You can check this for yourself. Several organizations did not believe what they had just heard. They said that consultations had already been undertaken. They couldn't believe why more consultations were going to be held. They felt that it was just really playing for time, more time. Now, if we look at the results of your consultations, as I stated earlier, quite honestly, really, there's nothing new. There's nothing that distinguishes it really from the report that we came up with after our consultations in October 2006 throughout these communities. And in fact, ours was very, very comprehensive compared to yours. I want you to know this. I think it's a very important point. Communities are waiting for answers. They're not waiting for the government to just use up time and buy time. Last March, we had a budget that had added nothing new for them. The government makes promises, and we see nothing. We just see conservative ideology with little respect for the French language of minorities outside Quebec and inside Quebec. Now, that being said, I'd like to address immigration and migration within provinces with a significant Anglophone population. The numbers are there. What we see is assimilation. They will become Anglophones. They'll end up speaking English as their dominant language in very little time, and they'll speak it to their children. Because in too few communities, unfortunately, history shows that there is a lack of respect for Francophone minorities. People are sent into these areas, and they make them believe that they will be able to live in French. But in fact, the reality is that that social fabric no longer exists, and assimilation is a reality. You live in New Brunswick. You know that in some areas of your own province there is assimilation. So how can you tell us today, then, that immigration and migration into areas where French language is a minority and where the education doesn't exist, that immersion will be able to replace the French language as a first language, and that will be a solution, and that will allow us to increase numbers, rather than putting significant amounts right into those communities in order to ensure that their institutions will last and that young people in their communities will be able to flourish. Thank you, Mr. Nadeau, for the question. Your preamble was very lengthy. I'll just point out that I don't agree with many parts of your preamble, but I respect your opinion. That's your opinion, and I respect it. But I don't share your opinion. I also don't share the vision of Canada that you seem to have. And that's fine. That's one of our strengths here, that we have different perspectives and different visions. But you're making some rather serious accusations against the Conservatives, and I don't accept those. It's false. If you look at what has been done by the Conservatives throughout Canada, and if you look at the Conservative government in New Brunswick, well, they're a government in New Brunswick that passed new legislation, and here, Bill 88 was enshrined in New Brunswick. That was a Conservative bill. And it's a Conservative government that included in its speech from the throne a commitment to official languages. And I am confident in the outcome of this work and the work that you yourself did, the work that many communities and individuals have undertaken. I am confident that Minister Vernet will unveil an action plan, a second phase that will be a positive thing for official language minority communities throughout the country. Now, that doesn't mean that the government will be able to meet all those challenges that exist within these communities. I know those challenges are there, and I know that assimilation exists. I don't claim that the government can meet and solve all those challenges. But to say that there shouldn't be Francophone migration into Manitoba, I don't agree. Manitoba isn't a Conservative or a Liberal government. It's a new democratic government. It's set its goals. It's working on achieving those goals. And I think it has to be acknowledged that the government has met its goals in terms of immigration. And I think we can support them in this. Thank you very much.
We'll continue with Mr. Godin to end the fourth round. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In your mandate, the minister said, well, the government wanted to have this trip across Canada because the Official Languages Committee had done that, but the government felt that it should do so too, and you were the one who was picked as special consultant to do so. So in reality, the mandate was to report new things to the minister on the Official Languages Committee. Is that not it? Well, my mandate, as you said, my mandate was to chair those consultations that had been set and to report back on what I heard from those individuals who appeared during the consultations. There were some specific things in the mandate with regard to the demographic issue, with regard to modernization of the state and economic development and the new economy of the 21st century. And the discussion was open. Knowing the government's position on the core challenges program, given the government's position in your mandate, because you were there to report back to the minister, wouldn't it have been good to say, well, listen, in your report, without giving a recommendation, but just to report back on the fact that everybody mentioned the core challenges program? Don't you think that would have been the right thing to do? Because I agree with Mr. Lemire that what you said was what was said, but you just forgot the fact that the core challenges program wasn't directly mentioned in the report. Well, I did say so earlier, Mr. Godin, that I mentioned it, and the minister, too, knew that I'd heard it in different places. When she was sitting next to me in Ottawa, that's when we talked. And we even talked at other times. And I told her that. I mentioned that on page 19 in the French report, 19 and 20 of the French version of the report, depending on which version you read. You didn't... weren't upset that you didn't talk about the core challenges problem? Not at all. So if somebody tells you something and you don't say it, this gives a bad impression because we know that the minister didn't want to talk about it, and that's one of the reasons that I think things happened in camera, because otherwise it would have been reported back in the papers. The court challenges programs was cut to defend, it used to defend official languages. I don't know. Well, you can presume whatever you want, but that wasn't part of my mandate, Mr. Godin, and I understand. I'm not embarrassed. You're not embarrassed. You've got a great imagination. I have a good imagination, too. Well, when we look at Francophones throughout the country, I'm sure that you were told that if there were French schools in Prince Edward Island, there could be court challenges And if there are French schools in Nova Scotia, it's because of court challenges. So people have been helped by court challenges. So it's a good chance that Francophone minority communities have won their cases before the courts. Well, I said so, and I'm pleased to say so again, that there are some cases that went before the courts that confirmed the rights that had been established either in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms or in provincial legislation in order to ensure that people could have access to those rights. But it forced the issue of the schools. Well, this allowed the courts to say to some governments, here are the rights of those groups, and you have to do this and this and the other thing. But you're claiming, Mr. Godin, that all those cases would not have been possible without the Court Challenges program. That's two things that are completely separate. No, but listen, does this not help some people? Yes, it can help some people. In colleges and universities, they made a request for the government to get involved in colleges and universities to help with the language issue. I think this is part of your recommendations. Perhaps it's a second recommendation, in fact. Was there money to ensure that there could be more support for official languages within the official languages within the colleges and universities to provide more professors, more classes, more programs? There are two things. The government supports institutions that provide programs for minority communities. There are also people that mentioned perhaps the Anglophone universities in Western Canada that provided courses or programs to Francophones, for example. And there are things that can be shared because some Francophone institutions were concerned that if other institutions were providing the program, this could undermine their ability to survive because they would lose some of their customers. So in the implementation, if the government decides to implement that recommendation, the government could establish a mechanism to determine which program would be assisted. For example, a Francophone program at UNB, if Moncton is less than 120 kilometers away. Or UNB and Simon Fraser, there's no Francophone university there. There could be a program perhaps there. These are questions that need to be decided with regard to the implementation of that recommendation. Thank you very much, Mr. Godin. That ends our 4 rounds of questions. Mr. Coder has a last question, and Mr. Chong too. So we have a few minutes left, so we'll try to quickly go through those questions and answers only. Mr. Coder, Mr. Chong, and a last question from Mr. Coder. Very, very quickly, please, gentlemen, because we have to free up the room after. Mr. Coder, thank you. In light of what my colleague and friend, Mr. Lord, said, perhaps he should run as a Conservative candidate. Well, the Conservatives abolished the Court Challenges program, and we were there to point it out. You admitted some people. You had a mandate, and at some point you said the government was organizing things, and that was one thing. But you were, to some extent, able to determine who was able to attend your events. And you agreed to see some people. Well, you know that linguistic duality, bilingualism, in the public service is a major issue. It's essential. Recently, I had a troubling trip to the Magdalen Islands to attend the funeral of the 4 sealers who died, and there was another one. Somebody who needed access to service in French and could not get it. This was troubling. If Minister Verner gives you a mandate, it's important to know what is happening with in the government itself. Why did you refuse to meet the Public Service Alliance? Why this refusal? Because if it was so important to make the recommendation, your recommendations, why not include this question, this issue of the Public Service Alliance? Thank you, Mr. Coder. I believe that providing services in the language of one's choice by the federal government has a constitutional responsibility, in fact, and a legal one, to do so. There's no doubt about that. Just like other governments in Canada have similar obligations, and in some cases even greater obligations than that of the federal government, particularly in New Brunswick, where the obligations are greater than that of the federal government. It was not within my mandate initially, and the way that I saw my mandate was that I would particularly focus on the situation of or not focus on training within the federal government, and look at the way that the government was providing services to people. That's clear, and I've said it on a number of occasions, that the government provides services in the language of people's choices. That is the responsibility of the government. The government has to accept that responsibility. I agreed to meet with some people, some groups, because I saw that this fit better with the mandate that I had been given, and others I did not agree because this did not fit so well with my mandate. So also, given the time that I had been allotted. Thank you. We'll go with the second question, Mr. Chong. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just a point of information, I think that somebody had asked before whether or not the public sector unions had been consulted. And my understanding is that they weren't. But at the same time, that they also never requested or asked to be consulted with. They never submitted anything, or neither did they ask to be part of the consultations. I just wanted to put that on the record. Mr. Lord, you asked, or you referred to one of the challenges I think we will be facing as a society, and that is the increasing diversity of the country. Statistics Canada last week published a study indicating that 1 in 6 Canadians now is what they term not just a minority, but a visible minority. So we're going to have, I think, a challenge or a work to do in reconciling this diversity, this increasing diversity, this what some call this galloping heterogeneity, with the country's most cherished institutions like bilingualism, like the need to have 2 official languages. I've always thought that one potential solution is for the government to work with provinces and territories to create a system where we graduate students who are not just bilingual but trilingual, where 2 of the 3 official languages would be part of that, and the 3rd language would be the student's choice. And this would be a way to preserve our institutions, like bilingualism, like the need to know both official languages while acknowledging the country's increasing diversity. And as a first-generation Canadian whose father was Chinese and whose mother was European, I can tell you from first-hand experience that we're not inventing the wheel here. In Europe, most students have knowledge of 3 languages, if not 4. And in many parts of Asia, like Hong Kong or Singapore, most people know at least 2 languages, if not 3. So just wanted your thoughts on an idea like that.
Thank you. And just on the as I said earlier to one question on something else, was I don't have all the invitations of people that asked to meet with me, and I cannot, but some I said yes to and some I said no to. With regards to the diversity of our country, the face of Canada is changing. And I think the government and citizens, we must understand those changes and see what opportunities come from these changes and how this will allow our country to grow even more. And to understand why so many people want to live in Canada. We're a country of prosperity. We're a country of rights, of freedoms, of the rule of law, of a strong democratic system. And those reasons are the reasons why we're so proud to be Canadian and why so many people want to be here. I think to limit ourselves simply to the 2, I think in terms of official languages, yes, we should limit ourselves to 2, but in terms of learning languages, we should not. And I was in Amsterdam just 2 weeks ago on business, and the 2 individuals working at the hotel where I was staying, they were young in their 20s, and they both spoke 4 languages. And I didn't sense there was a crisis of their identity, of who they were and what they stood for. They knew who they were, and they were very happy to accommodate and serve people in the language of their choice, and they could do it in 4 languages. And the 2 combined spoke 5 because they were 3 languages they shared, but each had a different language. Yeah. So, and it fascinated me, and to see that, in Canada we feel good when we speak 2 languages, but frankly, It's not that many. And when I was Premier of New Brunswick, we put a program in place to encourage learning a third language, and at the time we had selected Spanish because of volume. But I think across the country, we should favor and encourage teaching and learning of the two official languages and other languages as well.
Merci.
When we look at native populations, in just one thing, I think the native population in our country as well needs support in preserving their languages as well.
Okay. Je voudrais juste mentionner également que les travaux.
I'd just like to mention that this spring the committee will look at the approach and post-secondary education of young people in other languages. Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're saying, yes, it's important to learn a third, fourth languages, and other countries, perhaps they learn four languages. But don't you think that after 400 years, I'm sorry, I know that the Acadians celebrated their 300th anniversary a few years ago, but don't you think it's important for a country with 400 years of history to master both official languages? The government has failed. And I'll give you the example of education, where we have parents for French groups, where they don't have enough money. They say there's not enough money in immersion programs. It's a scandal. Parents in New Brunswick Anglophone parents are saying, well, you want my kid to learn French, but you're preventing me from doing so. And now you're saying my kid can't learn French. I think that's terrible. Don't you think that before people master 2, 3, 4 languages, they have to master the 2 official languages? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Godin. Mr. Godin. I didn't know if we were going to agree on one thing this morning, but we will, and that is, in fact, what the New Brunswick government is doing. It's preventing parents from having this choice. Just a moment. We do agree on one thing here. May I just continue, Mr. Chair? Official languages policy is to ensure that people learn both official languages. This is part of my report. We want to help our kids also learn other languages. Mr. Special Advisor on Consultations, I want to thank you on behalf of the members of the committee for your very direct answers. So to the committee members, we'll see you Thursday, and I wish you good luck in the next step of the action plan.
What's our time here?